from Spotify to talk about if you are a perfectionist. And I will let Joe obviously introduce that talk in just one moment. How you doing today, Joe, though? Are you okay?
I'm good, thank you.
Good,
Yeah,
good.
very excited to be here.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. So, for those who this is your first Tech Educators Careers Week talk, hello to schools and colleges out there that are joining us as well. The reason that we run Careers Week is because I know when speaking to students that the world of tech may seem like it's all about these, super billionaire people that are completely uninspiring and out there. And actually, the world of tech is just full of incredible people with incredible stories. And the truth is that it's full of people just like us, and that's fine. You don't have to be some crazy tech billionaire to be in the industry. So hopefully this inspires people out there to understand what a career in tech is really like, and the challenges and the real struggles that happen out there as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over for Joe. Joe, thank you once again for joining us,
My pleasure.
and looking forward to hearing your talk. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, both, let me share my slides. Let's see if we can get this working. Can you see that? Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to be talking today a little bit about perfectionism, and this is something that has really affected me quite a lot in my career, and it's muddled up with a whole load of other interesting mental health and mental well-being things. But it's something that I think we all really need to be aware of while we're working, and it's something that can really affect people who work in the tech industry quite a lot. But before I sort of dive into it, a little introduction to myself. So I'm Joe Franchetti. You can get me at This Is Joe Frank on basically all of the social medias. I have no idea what social media we're using anymore. And I am a developer advocate at Spotify. And for those of you who don't know what a developer advocate does, we spend a lot of time doing tech education. So I write blog posts, I give talks, I write demos to teach you how to use, in this case, Spotify technology. So how to use our APIs, our various SDKs, that kind of thing. And I spend a lot of time talking to developers out in the industry to find out what it is that they need from the technology that they're using. And through this experience of talking to developers, I have met an awful lot of developers who deal with perfectionism. I am a developer myself. I have dealt with perfectionism my entire career. Just to give you a little bit of back information about myself. So I studied engineering at university, electronic engineering, and I graduated in the 2008 recession. So for those of you who are studying right now, I really feel you. I feel you a lot. It's a difficult time to be getting a job out there. So when I graduated, BT had just let go 20,000 qualified engineers, and there were many other places also letting go of engineers, and getting a job in electronic engineering in this country was basically just impossible. There were engineers with 5 years of experience who were applying to graduate roles, and I didn't have a chance. So I thought to myself, well, what am I going to do now? And I've always had that sort of love of creativity, but also love of tech. And somebody suggested to me that web development might be a thing to try out. So I taught myself HTML and CSS, and I built a load of websites for my friends and family, and applied for a load of jobs with this terrible portfolio full of stuff that I built having no clue what I was doing. And this was 10 or so years ago, and the landscape has changed quite a lot since then. Like, again, I really feel for the people who are learning now. There's so much to learn. There's so many frameworks. There's so many new languages, so many tools out there to use. Like, there's a lot to learn. I picked up HTML and CSS and off I went. It's a very different landscape now, and it can feel quite scary, and it can feel difficult to not compare yourself to the people who are already out there. And I think in that comparison, like, perfectionism can really come up a lot. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, how much it can affect how we think, how we work, and how we work with other people. And if any of the things that I talk about today do affect you, you can absolutely reach out to me on social media. I love talking about this, and talking about my experience with this. So please feel free to reach out to me if any of this has affected you. My DMs are open. So when I was preparing for my first ever tech interview, I was given a very common piece of advice that I'm sure many of you have also heard, and that piece of advice was this: if an interviewer ever asks you what your weaknesses are, just tell them that you're a perfectionist. And this particular piece of advice was given to me by an older man who'd been in the industry for a while, and I sort of listened to him and I went, oh yeah, of course, brilliant, excellent advice, I will do that. And it's the kind of statement that makes everybody roll their eyes. You know, interviewees and interviewers alike know that this is a cop-out answer, right? The idea is that you're not really revealing a weakness, because employers want to hire perfectionists because perfectionists do great work. They do the best work, they do perfect work. That's the idea, right? And it never really occurred to me at the time, as I sort of naively accepted this more experienced man's instruction, that I'd grow to learn the real truth behind this statement, and that it really genuinely can be considered a weakness. So if we look it up, Wikipedia says that perfectionism in psychology is a personality trait characterized by a person striving for flawlessness, setting high performance standards, accompanied by critical self-evaluations and concerns regarding others' evaluations. Which sounds great. If I was an employer, I'd want to hire somebody who strives for flawlessness, who sets high standards, who cares about others' evaluations. You know, they sound like a real achiever. But the thing is that perfectionism can actually be a blocker to achievement. Imagine that you're not striving for greatness or excellence, you are striving for perfection. Now, you can't help but set yourself up to fail, because achieving perfection is not something that happens very often. And the problem is that perfectionists we measure our own self-worth by how able we are to achieve this perfection. And if we don't achieve these sort of lofty accomplishments that we've set for ourselves, we can actually be very harsh on ourselves. The trouble is that for perfectionists, our performance is intertwined with our sense of self. And when we don't succeed, we don't just feel disappointment in how we did. We feel disappointment in who we are as a person. We feel shame about who we are as a person. And this shame can manifest in many insidious and unpleasant ways. Now, perfectionists often engage in something called catastrophic thinking, or you might hear it called black and white thinking. And this is where something either is perfect or it's completely terrible disaster. And even things that most people would think are okay or good enough, literally good enough, falls into the disaster, absolutely terrible category. An example could be you've just built a new website and you're afraid to put it live because somebody might find an error in your code, or they might not think that it's the best that it could possibly be. And the idea of somebody out there in the world that you have never met thinking that there might be an error in your code, or that your website isn't the perfect that it could possibly be, becomes this kind of world-ending catastrophic scenario, something that would be absolutely devastating to live through, rather than something that's actually quite manageable and that could be worked through if and when it happens. And I used to have this absolutely crippling anxiety every time I wrote a blog post. I'd be terrified to put it live in case somebody out there who I'd never met before, who could be wrong, thought that maybe something I'd written was incorrect or disagreed with me. And I could get, 100 lovely comments on a blog post saying, hey, this is great, this is super useful to me, and I would get one comment saying, oh, you're wrong, I disagree, and it would destroy me. For weeks I'd be obsessing over this one comment. I'd be, it could even bring me to tears. It would elevate my heart rate. I'd be unable to eat. I'd be unable to sleep for thinking about it. And I was diagnosed as a perfectionist a few years ago, and for me it was actually a relief to finally have a name to put to this stress and anxiety that I was feeling. Every time I made a mistake or I had a mental block on work, I would spiral into this depression and this kind of decision paralysis where I couldn't work out what to do next, because I knew that if I put pen to paper, if I started typing, the thing that I made wouldn't be perfect, and therefore I never wanted to get started on it. And then that would make my mental block worse, and it would make my disgust with myself greater. And I had this little nasty voice in my head telling me that I wasn't good enough, that everybody knew that I was a hack, that everybody knew that I wasn't a competent developer, that everybody out there was better than me. And I used to convince myself that everyone was judging me and finding me lacking. And I could push myself into anxiety and stress and panic, all without ever actually receiving any external judgment. This would be just me expecting external judgment. And one time, the anxiety that I felt over my own failure to create a piece that was perfect manifested into physical pain as well. And the whole right-hand side of my neck and my shoulder seized up, and my muscles started to spasm, and the doctor had to eventually put me on Valium and muscle relaxants to get me to calm down. And this was fully just me doing this in my own head. And perfectionism can cause not only stress on your mind and your brain, but also on your body. And so you'll sometimes feel it manifest as a headache when you're trying to get started on work, or feeling your heart racing, or getting very sweaty palms, or achy muscles, all kinds of fun side effects. And the problem is that our industry, the tech industry, and capitalism, and our society as a whole, they love it when we strive for perfection. They want us to be building better things, building faster things, being the most successful. They want us to be earning the most money so that we can spend it on becoming even better. And the toxic tech employers will often encourage this unhealthy belief that we should constantly be striving to be working harder, learning everything, as if it's even possible to learn everything, to be constantly creating, to be constantly turned on. And this idea of needing to be successful and to turn a profit is drilled into us from quite an early age, unfortunately. In the UK, we have entrance exams for schools at 11 years old, and we're led to believe that after school we need to go to university, because if we don't go to university we're never going to get the right job. And perfectionists often pressure themselves into overtiredness, into anxiety, into depression, and into burnout, all while continuing to turn in actually very excellent work, but never daring to ask for help, because that would be admitting that they can't be perfect. And the other problem is that perfectionists will often disregard their own work, because as soon as they do it, it doesn't feel perfect. The thing that they were working towards is achieved now, and it hasn't brought them that satisfaction that they were hoping for. So they immediately start working on the next thing and the next thing, and they can really tire themselves out. I mean, we're talking about actual burnout here. And it's an unsustainable and very unhappy way to be, and can be very quickly lead to fatigue, to cognition issues, to memory issues. It's something you have to be really careful about. Burnout is no joke. So if you're not sure whether or not you've ever had perfectionist tendencies yourself, then I'd like to ask you a few questions to consider. And this is the one that got me. So my therapist asked me this once. She said, Would you consider yourself a perfectionist? So just have a think about that for a second. And if you answered, as I did, something along the lines of, oh no, there's no way I'm good enough to be a perfectionist, I'm afraid I have some news for you. How about this one? Have you ever felt like you can't start a project because you can't decide on how to start? Sometimes figuring out how to get the perfect start on your new project, be it building a website, writing a blog post, anything like that, typing those first few lines becomes a blocker to perfection, so you can't even get started. Or this one, have you ever left a project unfinished because you couldn't get it exactly how you wanted it? You've poured all this work and effort into this project, but you're never going to release it. You're never going to finish it because it's not perfect. You're going to just keep tweaking it indefinitely. You're never going to actually show it to anybody or ask anyone's opinion on it because they might judge it to be not perfect. How about this one? Have you ever worried about a project and then put it off and procrastinated and delayed until the final second, right up until the deadline, when suddenly you're forced to actually do the work and output something, and you find yourself, working till midnight, tapping away, just getting this thing done. And then when it's finished, you are surprised and you maybe feel a little bit silly about how much you procrastinated over it and how capable you were of actually getting it done in the end. And not only that, everybody actually thinks that the work that you did is great, even though you spent, half a day on it when you could have spent 2 weeks on it. Imagine how good it could have been if you hadn't procrastinated. Have you ever felt afraid or ashamed about asking for help from a colleague or a peer? Because maybe that would show that you don't know something or that you can't manage everything by yourself. And perfect people obviously know everything. So it's better if you just try that 1000th Google search than turn to the person next to you and ask them for help. Have you ever found yourself repeatedly scrolling through social media or watching reruns of Netflix or answering your emails or even tidying your house when you knew that you should be doing something else? And there's two sides to this question. So as I mentioned earlier, perfectionists have a tendency to procrastinate when we don't want to start or finish a project because it can't not be perfect if it's never started or finished. The other side of this is that perfectionism and capitalism wants us to be constantly working. It wants us to be constantly productive. And when we're not working, we feel like we should be. And we feel like we shouldn't be allowing ourselves downtime because that's lazy. And it's this kind of feeling that makes us do things like check our emails at midnight before we go to bed and then check them the first thing when we wake up in the morning. It makes us want to be always present on our work Slack because we feel like we need to be presenting this perfect employee who's always on, who's always working. And maybe you want to prove your dedication or you want to one up your colleagues or whatever reason it is that you're doing this behavior. It needs to be kept in check. You need to allow yourself real downtime. The time when you're not working is just as important as the time when you are working. It gives your brain time to recover, to refocus, to re-energize. And you need to not be making yourself feel guilty over the fact that you're resting and recovering. Like, this is really important. As I mentioned earlier, burnout is no joke. So what can we do as perfectionists and friends of perfectionists to help make our industry a kinder and safer place to work? The first thing that we can do is we can give ourselves time. Sometimes a problem can feel overwhelming. Sometimes we don't want to start the project. We don't want to finish the project. But it doesn't mean that we will never be able to start or we'll never be able to finish. It just means that we can't do it right now in this moment. So you need to give yourself time. and not let your feelings of guilt and shame take over. So take a walk outside, a break away from your computer, maybe even a whole day away from the problem. But what you need to do is schedule in a start time for when you're going to head back to it, when you're going to try again in the future. Like, now is clearly not a good time. Now we're in the blocker frame of mind. Allow yourself the time to get over that blocker, to let your brain percolate away in the background. Schedule in the time when you're going to sit back down and do it, and you'll find once you've allowed yourself that time to get over that panic spike, to allow your energy levels to sort of just level out again, you'll find it much easier to tackle the problem. The next thing to do is set deadlines and goals and targets and schedules, but be realistic about them. You know, this needs to be something that you can achieve, not I'm going to write War and Peace in 3 days. And if you struggle with setting these kinds of things, maybe ask a friend or ask your manager to help you set them. Too much freedom can be quite stifling to perfectionists. We need something that we can aim to do and then improve upon. So, you know, we can prove our excellence by doing better. But if you give us a blank canvas and say, just do something, we will procrastinate. We will start and abandon multiple projects because we don't know what we're aiming for. We don't know how to get to perfect yet. Setting an achievable goal will allow you to strive for excellence while removing the paralyzing nature of the open-ended task. And something that I found helps me a lot is telling somebody else about these deadlines or these goals that I've set for myself, kind of like an accountability buddy. It makes me feel more concretely about the goal. So if I tell myself I'm going to sit down tomorrow and I'm going to write 2 paragraphs of a blog post, I might not do it. But if I tell my colleague, hey, could you check in with me at the end of the day and see whether I wrote those 2 paragraphs, I'm much more likely to do it. I am much less likely to whinge on a promise to somebody else than I am on a promise to myself. And try and remember that perfectionism, perfect is the enemy of great. So perfectionism isn't about high standards, it's about unrealistic standards. And if you think about it, how many projects have you thrown away because they weren't perfect, or because you were worried that other people would judge them? How many hours of work have you put into something that you've just thrown away? You know, it could be great. Just because it isn't perfect, it could be good enough, because you know what good enough means? It means that it's good enough. You need to show it to people. You need to release the work that you're doing. Try and remember to ask for help rather than struggling for hours on a problem on your own. No one is going to judge you for asking, and you'll find that you will get past those blockers much easier if you do. Getting something out is better than abandoning all of your hard work, and you'll likely be surprised that not only will the majority of people not even notice these imperfections that you think are glaring and obvious, but they're going to think that your work is great. Try and acknowledge that you are your own most harsh critic. Most people don't actually expect perfectionism from other people. Perfectionists only think that they do. No one is going to judge you as harshly as you judge yourself. It's of course okay to make mistakes. Everybody does it. It's okay to release imperfect code. That's why we have code reviews. We show it to somebody else, they find a mistake, we fix the mistake, we move on with our lives. It's okay if somebody calls you up on a mistake that you made. You can thank them, you can learn something from it, and you will both move on and the world will not end. Something that I say to a lot of people is try and see yourself as you see your friends. It's very easy to start, it's very easy to start putting yourself down when you don't meet your own unachievable expectations. So consider instead how you'd react if somebody said the things that is in your mind that you're saying about yourself. Imagine if somebody said those things about one of your friends. You would absolutely stand up for them. You wouldn't allow that kind of behavior, that kind of talk. So don't allow it by your brain about yourself. Try and quieten down that little nasty voice in your head. And then finally, think your fears through to their logical conclusion. So this is the problem with catastrophic thinking. There's no logic involved in it. So we think if I make a mistake in front of my colleagues, that would be the end of the world. But we never consider what the end of the world would actually look like. So consider the worst possible outcome of your fear, and then be honest with yourself about how likely that scenario really is. And then you can consider what the real outcome of this scenario is going to be. So if I make a mistake in front of my colleagues, they're all going to point and laugh at me. Not only that, they're going to share it in front of the entire company, and they're going to say, oh my goodness, Joe thought this thing, what an idiot, we should fire her. Not only that, we should tell the entire internet about how dumb she is, and she'll never get a job again. She will be the laughing stock. Everybody's going to email her every day saying, I can't believe you made this mistake. Like, is that likely? Probably not. What is more likely is that they're going to go, oh, hey, I spotted this mistake. Can you fix it? And you'll fix it. And 10 minutes later, you'll both have forgotten what it was that even happened. And maybe there's a chance there to fill a gap in your knowledge. Like, you learn something new. Life will continue. The end will not come. Conversely, if your colleagues do point and laugh, they're probably assholes and you probably don't want to be working with them. Teaching yourself to think your fears through to their logical conclusion will save you hours and hours of stress and panic. And the more that I've spoken about my experiences with perfectionism, the more that people have told me about their own similar experiences and problems. And with the tendency for intelligence and high achievement in tech industry employees, it's not really surprising that so many people often suffer from perfectionism. And the more that we talk about it, the less stigma we'll feel around dealing with this and helping other people through it. If you're concerned, there are so many people that you can talk to. You can talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends. You can talk to your managers, to your line managers. If you're worried about managing your time or your workload, don't be afraid to ask the questions that you're worried about. There is no such thing as a stupid question. I know it's very easy to say, but really it's something we all need to live. And try and remember that everybody goes through rough patches occasionally, and we don't have to downplay that. Development is hard. Software development is a difficult job to do. And sometimes we're going to find things difficult, and sometimes we're not going to be perfect. But what we can do is we can validate our own experience and others' experiences and say, yeah, this is hard sometimes. We all make mistakes. The more open and communicative we can be about mental health, about perfectionism, about imposter syndrome, about anxiety, the more pleasant a working experience we can create for everybody. And I really hope that by talking about it, we can increase awareness as much as possible and just help everybody else in the industry to learn a little bit more about what is going on in their heads, because we all deserve to be comfortable and happy here, and you deserve to be here. So that is perfectionism. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow, thank you so much for that. And the comments in chat of people just being able to so readily relate to elements, the full scope of perfectionism and what it means and what it's meant for you in your experience and what it's meant for others that you've experienced is incredible, because I think you really just you hit the nail on the head at the end. It's like, if we don't talk about these things, we kind of feel like we are the only person in the world that could possibly be feeling that. And the truth is, when someone
Totally.
else says it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I've been feeling that, I've been feeling that, I've been feeling that. And all of a sudden, like your internal monologue and that increasing, ever increasing pressure you're putting on yourself all of a sudden just drops, because it's like, I'm not the only person in the world that's feeling like that. I always liken it to when in your mind, if you ever can't sleep at night because your sort of mind's whirring, you feel like you're the only person in the world that's awake at 1 in the morning. When the truth
Yeah,
is, there's probably 13 people on your road that are also experiencing that. So thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for taking the time to
my
talk about it.
pleasure.
I'm just looking over some of the questions that we've got in chat, and I think, in fact, speaking about that sort of continual escalation in your mind, Sam's asked, what are your methods for switching off your brain when trying to get into downtime? Stop thinking about a problem. Because you're right, you mentioned earlier in the talk that, chemically bringing yourself into that world of relaxation actually prepares you so much more mentally for when you're in that work time. But I know personally, sometimes you can't de-escalate your brain, and it's very difficult. So
Yeah.
what's your recommendations for that?
So there's a few different things that you can do, and obviously this is all going to be very personal. Um, so when you are in that whirlpool of, oh my goodness, I can't get this right, I'm stuck, I don't know what's going on, try and remember the five senses. So taste, smell, sight, touch, uh, what have I missed? Scent? Oh, hearing. Thank you. um, and try and do something. It's called grounding. So these are grounding techniques. So for me, looking at nature is a really great grounding technique. And a lot of people, there's actually a lot of studies around the fact that looking at nature can really help your mind relax. It releases basically happy hormones into your brain. So literally take yourself physically out of the space that is stressing you. Take yourself to somewhere where you can look at nature, where you can, I know people say touch grass, but literally touch
Right.
grass, or pet an animal, stroke a soft scarf, something where you're getting that nice soft touch feeling. Um, Smell, so smelling a perfume that you enjoy or lighting a scented candle, that kind of thing that just brings you into a different space where you're experiencing something pleasant. Making yourself a nice cup of tea or something something soothing. So I'm not talking about, grabbing a bar of chocolate or downing 5 espressos, like something that's going to bring your heart rate back down again rather than elevate it. Listening to calming music, or doesn't even need to be calming if you enjoy metal, listening to screamy music, anything that just takes you out of that panic place and brings you into a place where you're feeling more grounded, you're feeling more connected to what is happening in your brain. And the way I like to think of it is like you're in this whirlwind, and it lets you just take a step back out of the whirlwind and go, oh, there's a whirlwind happening there. I need to just step away from this for a little while. But taking yourself out of the space physically is a huge difference. So if you're sat at your computer and you're panicking, try and go somewhere that isn't your computer.
And I think that's a really, not only the advice on the sensory thing, which I thought was brilliant, by the way, because I've never really considered it in that manner. Um, but taking yourself out of the space for sure is, we always say get up and take a break away from your computer. But the step before that is probably recognizing that escalation, as you talked about earlier, is like, we have a lot with students where students we'll say to a student, it's like, if you can't solve something in 15 minutes, take yourself up and away and even move on to another project or another part of the project, because you are going to start getting into that escalation cycle, aren't you? Of almost feeling like you're failing. I think is probably the way
Yeah,
that I would describe it.
yeah,
Is I feel like I'm failing. I can't solve this right now. I must be failing at it. When the truth is, sometimes these things will percolate away from the computer and away from it, and you come back and just go,
yeah.
"Oh, of course it was that." But it was just you just
I
weren't
always
ready
like
to
to
solve it.
say it's not a fail, it's a flail. Like I'm having a bit of a flail moment. I can walk away, I will come back feeling refreshed, feeling like my brain is better able to handle this.
And I think that's again, it's that for me really points to and alludes to the fact of like the self-care element of it, that we do overpressure ourselves and we
Yeah.
do expect to know the answers. I mean, you mentioned, perfectionism's one side of this manifesting itself, and certainly we see in younger students, and newer software developers, this imposter syndrome. I say that,
Mhm.
and yet every developer I speak to who's been in the industry for 10 years is like, I still get it all of the time. So
Yeah.
actually, but I think it certainly does present itself a lot more in junior developers. Is that these feelings and these emotions that we have, and I think you alluded to it earlier as well, in the industry we're more predisposed to because of, it's a creative industry. There's, people's brains are functioning a lot more. You're using, the brain as a muscle a lot more. And I think the important takeaway for me is the fact that this can manifest in so many different ways. And it's okay if you're looking at it and going, oh, again, the advice here is just like, I can't believe how much it's resonating with me, etc., etc. It's like, this is it's great to talk about and it's great to, but the thing to really take away is to action that outcome of actually recognizing it and then taking that break away, because that's the only way you will overcome it or start to overcome it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a dangerous trap here as well, which I also fell into when I was sort of starting my journey on the recognition, is that you can become a perfectionist about recognizing your perfectionist tendencies, and then you can have a tendency to um, bully yourself. Why didn't I see that happening? Why couldn't I tell that I was in the whirlwind? So you need to give yourself a little bit of grace. It takes a really long time to recognize these things in yourself. So something you can try doing, it's something that has never worked for me, but I know it works for a lot of people, is journaling. So at the end of your day, take 20 minutes before you go to bed just to sit down with yourself and say, how did today go? What were the emotions that I felt throughout the day? What triggered me into getting into that place? So, did I get up from bed and sit immediately on my computer, drink a coffee, and then try and hit this problem? Was my brain already like, oh my goodness, what is happening state? Or, did I get up an hour early and go for a walk and allow myself to wake up? And did I eat a healthy breakfast? And did I allow myself the time to prepare for this problem? How am I helping myself and how am I hindering myself in my sort of daily activities? Why is this happening to me? So that can really help. And if you don't do journaling, try and at least spend some time with yourself considering your day and how it went. I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, you get that thing where your head hits the pillow and you're like, oh, let's remember every single thing that we did wrong today. Like, great. And then you're sat there running this list of all the terrible things that you've done. And the reason why that happens is because we don't allow ourselves downtime in the day to process what has happened. So your head is hitting the pillow and your brain is going, oh, thank goodness. Okay, let's go over what happened in the day. But if you actually set aside time to do that and process your thoughts and be reasonable about them, like, yes, you might have made a mistake. It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. Fine.
Oh,
If you process
I've not moved enough. I've been so engaged. I haven't moved, and the office has decided to turn the lights off. So
Nice.
hopefully,
Good
someone
night.
in the other. Cheers. I need to go and process the day now. Apparently, 1 second. I'm just going to quickly stand up so I can get the lights back on. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, so if you spend like 20 minutes processing the day, you'll find that when you do actually put your head down on the pillow and you are trying to go to sleep, you'll find it much easier to sleep because you've already done that processing and your brain is like, okay, now it's sleep time. And there's a whole other interesting thing there about how much getting a good night's sleep can affect your ability to then be calmer and process better the next day. Like, it's a whole cycle.
I'm sorry if I look like I'm a bit distracted. Apart from the lights going off, the chat is going absolutely manic here. So I just want to make sure I don't miss anyone's questions
For
because there's
sure.
questions and just lovely comments as well. So hopefully we'll be able to send you some of the comments as well. But
Oh, nice.
just from Femi here, is there a lot of awareness within companies regarding imposter syndrome and how to manage it? Or is it everyone carrying it around with them, kind of speaking about it, but almost not within a company context? So what's your experience with that?
It does vary from company to company. Like I can't promise you that you're going to go into the industry and have a great time. I wish I could, but I can't. Um, what you can do is talk to your managers about it, because the thing that is absolutely true is that this is a universal feeling. Like, I was in a conference last week with 1,500 people, and the speaker said, "Who's felt imposter syndrome?" Every single person in the audience of 1,500 developers put their hands up. It is a universal feeling. We have all felt it and we all understand it, and we have all been junior developers at one point. Like, we know what this experience is like. So please be honest with the people that you're working with, be honest with the people that you're managing, and tell them if you are struggling. You kind of, a lot of companies will put in things like offering counseling, or running inclusivity type workshops, but you really need to be your own advocate. Unfortunately, no one is going to know what is going on in your head, so you're going to need to tell people. And when you do, you will find that they do have support available, but they're not going to give you that support unless you ask for it. That's sort of the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it leads back to your talk earlier about talking about it. Because again, if you can't, if you don't articulate it, people aren't able to support. And what you'll
Yeah,
probably find is the second you do start articulating it, it almost normalizes it once more. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. You know, not every company understands or takes the time to ask and recognize it, so you do have to champion it yourself. Tim's
yeah,
asked about catching yourself being hard on yourself, and I think you'd already covered that. So, like, great. I just want to check if there's any. Some companies have mental health first aid trained employees. I think that's a really good point as well, and it's something that a lot more companies I'm seeing are doing that as well. Awesome. I feel like I've maybe missed some questions in the chat, but it's just so much on the chat. I'm just like, I love this. It resonated in so many ways. Such good advice and reassurance. Sometimes I've had to remind myself that my techniques for managing my feelings also don't have to be perfect, and it's so
exactly.
true.
I
Awesome.
One thing that I will say, and I realize that this comes from a place of privilege, is if you can get talking therapy, um, it's the best thing I have ever done for myself. And whether that is counselling through work, whether that's through the NHS, the British Council of Psychotherapists, um, just talking about your feelings, talking about how much this is affecting you, can make a huge difference on how able you are to then recognize it in yourself when it happens. So if you can get therapy, absolutely get therapy. It changed my life. Like, this is the reason why I'm able to talk about this now.
And inspire others as you can see. So thank you so much for doing that. Jessica just asked, is there any tips to help when you see someone else go down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, you will see it often in colleagues when they're sort of, if you see them doing the same thing over and over again and getting the wrong result out at the end. You can talk to them. You can offer to maybe go on a break with them. Like, hey, it looks like you're struggling here. Shall we go out for a walk? Do you want to jump on a call and just have a chat? Like, why don't we both, if you're working remotely, maybe jump on a call, put your headphones in, and both go out for a walk separately together. Just try and take them out of the situation. And if you don't feel like you have the ability to do that, you can absolutely have a word with their manager and say, like, I'm concerned about this person. I think maybe they need a little bit of a break, or they need a little bit of help. Um, just, yeah, recognition from somebody else can be such a huge um, help to you as well when you're in that bubble. Having someone be like, oh, I see they're struggling, is there anything I can do to help, can just, oh, it can be such a relief when you're stuck in that space and you're too afraid to ask for help. So don't be afraid to offer help.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing as well is no one, I don't believe anyone would, if you're asking someone and checking in on someone and they're absolutely fine, it's like no one's going to go, why are you checking in on me? What are you doing? Like, but if you don't check in and you feel there's something, there's an opportunity there that you may have missed. So I think always just take the opportunity to check in. And that sets a great culture that, hopefully someone else would be checking in on you too.
Yeah.
I always have this thing where I say to one of my friends, I say, are you okay? And they're like, well, do you want the British answer or do you want the actual answer? And I say, I always
Yeah.
want the actual answer. Tell me how you really are. And I think we do have this culture of how are you, and the standard response is okay. And if we can break that, actually we have a much more enriching and fruitful relationship with our peers and with the people around us. So
Yeah.
my advice on that would always be, sorry, no, this isn't my talk, but my advice is always don't, like, the stock answer isn't yeah, I'm fine. Actually, just be honest and say, oh, do you know what? I didn't get to sleep last night, so if I'm a bit groggy today or if I'm feeling a bit down, and then someone hopefully will recheck in on you and go, try to just get up for 5 minutes and come and play table tennis or whatever it is that you do just to sort of break that cycle. So I think be honest as well, and take the opportunity. If someone is asking you, I think they genuinely do want to know. We don't have to give that British answer of I'm fine.
Yeah.
No. So yeah.
And I think we can also help ourselves by putting in, what's the word that I'm looking for, ceremonies that can help this kind of thing. So
Mm.
if you're in a work environment and you do something like a retro, which is where you look back at how the previous week or 2 weeks went and you write down your thoughts on how it went, like that kind of enabling that kind of place where everyone can be open and honest about how they think their work went, how they think their week went. I think that's it. Making sure that you have those check-ins with your team is also super important. If you don't feel like you can turn around to someone and honestly say how how are you or how you're feeling, then having an actual weekly space where you're like, this is the place where we say how we're feeling,
Yep.
suddenly creates a safe place to do that.
And again, it all comes back to being open and honest, doesn't it? And I think that's really the building block of what we're talking about here is, or what I'm hearing is, there's a duty of care to check in, and that's us as human beings on each other, right? It's not a company to an individual. That's just, in my view. Um, but there's also sort of open and honesty at all times. And if we can do that, I think that puts us in a much better position as well.
Yeah.
I'm just, any tips on when you see, ask at least twice, probably more if you think something's not right with someone. None of us says so the first time. That's an interesting point by Jez there. You know, yeah. Again, the stock answer might just be, I'm fine.
Yeah. Yeah, but how are you really doing?
There you go. And you know what, that's actually that's because it's almost sort of flipping it, isn't it? They're making it a bit light-hearted, but actually you really are giving someone that open door to walk through to really tell you.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway.
But also, I do want to say, like, make sure if you are asking somebody genuinely how they are feeling, make sure that you have the space within yourself to hold that and receive that information. Because if you're feeling overwhelmed yourself and you're taking on the burdens of somebody else, that's not going to be good for you.
Mm.
So if you don't think that you have the ability, if you see somebody struggling, but you don't have the capability to help them, you can absolutely bring it up with a manager, a line manager, a different colleague. Like, you don't have to do this all on your own. You have a whole support network around you.
Amazing. Sorry, this chat's going mad again. It's trying to keep up on it. I think Femi's just asked if we caught up on Tim being hard on yourself, and I think we did catch that one earlier. So, um, Joe, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming along today, for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, and for allowing us to talk about this as well.
That's
Because
really my pleasure. Like, this is so important to me. I had such a terrible time when I first joined the industry and I was really hard on myself. I'd be having panic attacks like weekly, and I don't want other people to have to do that. Like, it doesn't need to be like that.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And again, speaking about it, so thank you for doing that. Awesome. Well, thank you once again from the entire community, and we would love to have you back at some point in the future. In fact, I don't know if we've already discussed that. So, um, yep, amazing. And once again, thank you. And for everyone else who's joining us for the next event, we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thank you, Joe. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.